Hi everybody, this is Roger Linn, and I'm here to talk about my new expressive MIDI controller called the LinnStrument today. And thank you all for coming. Let's see here. First of all, just to find out what your interest is, what's everybody's interest? Do people know much about LinnStrument? Do you not know much about it? Are you note players, or are you more DJ type players? Things like that. And I'll just let the answers scroll down. Aha, hello from Germany. That's very nice. Well, actually, while that's happening, if you do want to chime in, I'll just tell you briefly about what LinnStrument is if you haven't heard about it yet, or you don't know much about it. It's an expressive controller, and what that means is it's like this new class of expressive controllers. There's the Rolly C-board, there's the Continuum, there's the sound plane, there's one out of England called the Eigenharp, and it's sort of the new revolution. And the reason for these devices is that most people are playing synthesis with MIDI keyboards, which are just basically a bunch of on-off switches, although they can tell how fast you turn it on. But it makes for not much musical expression in the terms of what a guitar can do, or a saxophone, or a violin, or something like that. And so as a result, you may not have noticed that in popular music, all the instrumental solos are gone now. They've disappeared in all forms of electronically generated pop music. So, for example, electronic pop has no instrumental solos. Hip hop has no instrumental solos. Both those are all, the tracks are all generated by electronic instruments. And so I and these few other makers of machines are trying to do something about that. And so what we're doing is instead of a MIDI keyboard, which just turns the sound on and turns the sound off, we're capturing 3 dimensions of expression. And let me tell you what that means. I've got a very, very basic analog synthesizer sound comprised of only a pulse oscillator and a filter. And I'm going to play that here. Actually, this is better. So when I vary the pressure with my finger, it varies the loudness of the note. And then when I wiggle my finger left and right, I get a vibrato, or I can slide from note to note. And I can also move my finger back and forward, and what that does is vary the tone or the timbre. In this case, I'm varying a parameter of a pulse oscillator called pulse width, which varies the tone of the oscillator. From a narrow pulse width to a wide 50% duty cycle pulse width. And that's independent for all notes. I can get independent simultaneous pitch bends. Independent pressure. Independent y-axis control. And this allows me to do things like this. Now, the other thing that's different about LinnStrument is you're probably wondering, why aren't the notes arranged like as on a MIDI keyboard? Instead, what you see, it's just a big grid. It's 200 little rubber drum pads. In fact, I can zoom up on that so you can see it a little bit better. These are just like drum pads, except they're smaller. They're about 3/4 of an inch spaced from each other, 3/4 inches square. And what that does is, the way the notes are arranged is like any stringed instrument. In fact, let me just give you a stringed instrument sound here, a Stratocaster sound. Each of these rows is like a string with consecutive semitones. Let me turn that echo off. And then you can tune these rows because they're like strings. Each one is like a string. And you can tune them however you want. You can tune the upper six rows like a guitar, or you can tune them like a violin or a cello in musical fifths, or you can use the default tuning in the way that most of the 900 LinnStrumentalists use, which is all musical fourths, or 5 semitones. So I can play chords. And what the lights do is they tell me where the natural notes are, like the white keys on a piano. So I can play the individual semitones, but if I play just the lights, I'm going to get the effect of a major scale, just like the white keys of a piano. And I don't know if you can see on the monitor there, but the C notes are all in blue, whereas the other notes are in green. And I can change that. I can change the colors to whatever I want. But that allows me to see very clearly where all the scale notes are. So for example, if I'm playing in the key of D, here's a C, so I know that D is right above that. So what I'm going to do is play you a few sounds on the instrument. Let me move the camera back to a position where you can see everything. So here are a few sounds on it. You heard that analog synthesizer sound. Here's a distortion slide guitar sound. Here's a pedal steel guitar sound. And by the way, you may see the little red lights going on. All that does is it tells me where the same note is on other strings, because the note pitches overlap. So even though you've got 200 notes here, because the pitches overlap, the total range is 5 octaves, just like a 5-octave MIDI keyboard. So here's some other sounds. Here's this clean Stratocaster sound that I played before. I'm going to move this up just a little bit. And in this case, now one thing I should say is that this stringed instrument note layout is much, much better than the piano layout, with all due respect to my friendly competitors at the Roley Company who make a C-board, which is a very good instrument. But the trouble with the arrangement of notes on a piano keyboard is that there are two problems. Number one, the notes are not evenly spaced in pitch. So when you do pitch slides, they're going to be different distances depending on what notes you're playing going from and to. And the other thing too is that the black keys are in the back. So if you want to do a single note, a semitone bend, you have to go in a diagonal. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. It was great at a time a few centuries ago when you needed to put a string behind each key and most of the music was all in a major chord or a minor chord. But for today's music and for the expressiveness that we want, it just doesn't work terribly well. On LinnStrument, by comparison, if I want to bend a note from a half note or a whole tone bend, 2 semitones, I just start on the one note like C, and then I slide it up to D. No need for a separate pitch bend wheel, and if I want to give it vibrato, instead of having a mod wheel, I just wiggle my finger. So it's much easier to learn if you consider that on a piano, if you want to play a given chord, you have to learn 12 different positions for that chord depending on what key you play in. Excuse me, I've got some allergies here in Berkeley, California, and the pollen is flowing. So if on a piano, if you want to play a C chord, a major chord, that's one fingering. If you want to play it in C sharp, it's a different fingering. If you want to play in D, it's a different fingering. And that makes the piano very inviting as long as you're playing very simple music. But once you want to play something more complex, it's very much more difficult to learn and play. Whereas on LinnStrument, it's what's called isomorphic. So here's a C chord, here's a C sharp chord, D chord, D sharp, and no matter what rows and strings I play, it's the same shape. So it's very easy to play, even easier than a guitar, if you have all the strings or the rows tuned to the same intervals between. And the same thing for scales. If I want to play a major scale, anywhere I play it, it's the same fingering. So it's very, very easy to learn, and you don't have to learn theory as you do on a piano keyboard.